Now let's start in South Sudan. Africa's youngest state will be cutting its oil outputs to just about 100,000 barrels a day over the weekend as it moves towards a full shutdown. Now that comes after Sudan decided to block its exports in a row over rebels operating across their common border. At the moment, Sudan is the only conduit for South Sudan's oil exports, and it said about a month ago it would close 2 cross-border oil pipelines within 2 months. It insisted that oil production has to be shut by the 7th of August unless South Sudan ends support for the rebels. So far, however, South Sudan's government has refuted repeatedly those claims. Oil and foreign grants are the main sources of funding for South Sudan's budget. Diplomats, however, are concerned that turning off the oil wells will undermine the fragile stability in the African country, which seceded from Sudan in 2011. On to Mozambique now. The country has seen a dramatic rise in economic activity, and while the country's consumer price index was down marginally in June, the country has seen renewed interest from investors looking to capitalize on the discovery of enormous reserves of coal and natural gas there. As CCTV's Angelo Coppola reports, however, Mozambique's story isn't just about commodities.
The capital city is a microcosm of the country. The tourism industry was non-existent during the Civil War, but it's since come to life and has grown in leaps and bounds. In 2005, it grew by more than 35% and has grown steadily since then. There is construction happening on every street corner. The city centre is a hive of activity, and there are lots of tourists on the street.
Tourist apartments, they make many things because start to learn people to know what's happening about this area, and then they organize this space to sell craft, and then other things they are making a publicity, to show the tourism where you can get the craft.
The city hotel industry is also seeing an uptick in business.
It's a lot of excitement going on in the city. I would say that 90% of our guests are corporates. 95% of our guests are corporates and 5% are leisure.
Tourism is an enabler in most countries. It's an ideal opportunity to develop a country's entrepreneurial spirit. And if a country is blessed with natural beauty and abundant mineral resources, the ingredients are in place for sustained economic growth and prosperity. There's a burgeoning tourism industry developing in Maputo, and it's driven by the resources discovery in the rest of the country. It's being led by the business tourism sector. I'm Angelo Coppola for CCTV in Maputo.
Still in that general region, South Africa and the European Union essentially vowed to strengthen trade and investment ties in a growing number of areas during the 6th European Union-South Africa Summit. With the details, here's CCTV's Peter Akaba.
South Africa President Jacob Zuma, European Commission President Jose Manuel Barroso, and European Council President Herman Van Rompuy met in Pretoria and highlighted the opportunity to strengthen the strategic relations between the EU and South Africa, especially in the area of trade. Discussions focused on how to boost job creation, economic growth and investment, especially after the European slowdown.
Our trade, both ways, with South Africa is bigger than the trade of the United States and China combined. Having said this, recently the trade was not so big as we wished, precisely because of the economic situation in Europe. This is reality.
The European Union officials underscored the strong spirit of cooperation between the EU and South Africa and underscored what they called a change in the way Africa was perceived by Europeans.
I want to tell you that the way in Europe people are looking today at Africa is very, very different from the way it was some time ago. It is no longer the traditional development assistance, even if development assistance is necessary, perspective. It is much more a perspective also of joint opportunities. There are many complementarities between Africa and the European Union.
While Africa is now being viewed by many as a destination for investment and a market for their goods, and despite robust economic growth, economic and social realities point to the fact that inequality and poverty are still a cause for concern on the continent.
South Africa is still faced with the inherited challenges of unequal wealth and resources distribution, inequality, unemployment, and deeply entrenched poverty. We are of the firm view that given these realities, the EU should continue its development programs in South Africa.
According to statistics quoted by the South Africa Institute of International Affairs, the EU remains South Africa's leading regional partner in terms of trade, and 3/4 of the foreign direct investment stock in the country originates directly from the European Union. Peter Kaba, CCTV.
Right, so let's get some perspective on what exactly is going on in the relationship between these two titans. We're now joined by CCTV's Miriam Bemard. She's live over in London. Now, Miriam, we've seen quite a few spats between these two sides on taxes on the exports of raw materials and, of course, something else on agricultural exports as well over to the EU from South Africa. What are the main concerns, however, that the EU has with its trade relationship with South Africa?
Well, it's a twofold, actually. Let's start with saying, Rama, that for South Africa, the main issues are lower tariffs for its wine exports to Europe and a quota for sugar exports. The EU, on the other hand, wants more access to the agricultural industry, especially farmed products, but not at the cost of European operators. When the European Commissioner for Trade spoke this week, he reiterated trade ties of the EU and South Africa at a healthy 46 billion euros, more than 20 billion more than a decade ago.
Indeed. Of course, the EU Commissioner is also, in this particular instance, the EU Trade Commissioner has this view that the export taxes on raw materials would essentially not develop South Africa's industrialization. What's the rationale for that?
Well, a part of it is that the minister is basically saying it's not exports, but rather investment, Rama, that will strengthen South Africa's manufacturing sector. So the government has to play nice, essentially. The EU wants increased trade ties with less restrictions, especially after rumblings that the South African government is imposing more restrictions on exports on things like scrap metal and possibly on things like minerals, all potentially increasing export duties on raw materials. On the political front, Rama, the EU is also warning that investors are watching developments very carefully. EU countries are the source of about 88% of foreign direct investment stock in South Africa, and these restrictions could hinder on those long-term prospects.
Indeed. Let's reel in CCTV Sumitra Naidu, who's live in Johannesburg. She joins us now live from that city. The EU Trade Commission, of course, warning South Africa not to take its relationship with the EU, as far as trade is concerned, for granted. What is the reaction to that line?
Well, the Trade and Industry Minister, Rob Davies, of course, stunned by the comments. He was right there when the comments were made. And I think many in the South African camp very annoyed with some of those comments. You know, putting that into context, there is the concern that some of the treaties have been cancelled. This is what the EU is saying. And of course, from the South African side, they're saying that the treaties haven't been cancelled. They were up for renegotiation, and they asked for renegotiation back in 2011, and no agreement was reached, and they've now since lapsed. These affecting countries like Luxembourg, Belgium, and Spain. So those treaties have been, they have essentially expired, but they still have a 10-year protection agreement on them, meaning that any new investors wouldn't actually fall under that agreement. But what South Africa is really trying to do is put in a new investment framework for the country. And of course, it's looking at a new Foreign Direct Investment Act. Of course, that is taking a bit of time, and that seems to have annoyed the Europeans. But from the South African side, some believing that, you know, the Europeans are now being disingenuous, they're now playing politics, and that they really need to come to the table. However, we had President Jacob Zuma issuing a statement saying that we're reassuring the European Union that they're still a very strategic, very important partner for South Africa, and we want to continue that kind of relationship. They have no concern in terms of risks, a risk associated with any investment.
Let's talk about something else that also has ticked off the European and taxes on exports of raw materials. Now, are these likely to remain in force, given the fact that the ANC is extremely keen to have a lot more value addition done in South Africa?
Well, South Africa's plan right now, it all falls into this national development plan. It's really an economic plan to help lift the country, to reduce poverty, to create jobs. That plan is in place, and a part of that actually makes up a big part of it. They want to actually create a value chains. They do want to manufacture more materials here, produce full goods, and then send it overseas. They feel that this is the way to go in terms of creating jobs, and it's really changing the landscape to suit South Africa right now in terms of economic growth. We're in a very low growth situation at the moment, and a plan needs to be put in place in order to lift that. So they're looking at creating value chains, they're looking at creating jobs, they're looking at beneficiation. So it is really very much part of their plans, but they're not looking at moving away from trade with Europe. They still believe it's a very good partner, but they're looking at an equalization of trade between the two countries.
Indeed. We'll have to leave it there for the time being, though. Thank you very much for that. That's CCTV's Sumitra Naidu in Johannesburg. Miriam Bemard, however, is staying online for the time being, and this is the reason why. In the last 24 hours, Nigeria's oil minister, Diezani Alison Madueke, defended sweeping powers that her post would acquire if a contentious petroleum industry bill would become law. That bill in question is a vast piece of legislation that's meant to overhaul everything from fiscal terms for oil companies to the structure of Nigeria's state-owned oil company. Now, two major sticking points are special fund for communities living around oil fields, which has divided legislators quite literally along geographical north-south lines, and of course extra powers granted to the minister, which have essentially unified legislators against her. The bill has been in gestation for 5 years now, and it has not been passed due to political wrangling over many of its clauses. However, uncertainty while this law is still being debated has held up billions of dollars worth of exploration, production and investment as well. Let's get some reactions from the other end of the pond. CCTV's Miriam Bemard joins us once again from London. Let's start, however, with news coming out of Nigeria today. Reports that a parliamentary committee in Nigeria is essentially recommending that the executive revokes the sale agreement of an oil block to Eni and Shell. Now, Shell has defended the deal, saying it's above board, but has there been any official reaction from Eni?
Rama, so far we haven't heard any official word from Eni, but this will certainly be one case that sets the precedence for other global oil companies working in the region. You know, back in 2011, if you remember, Shell and Eni paid $1.3 billion for this block. The Nigerian government acted as a channel for directing most of that money to the block's original owner, local company Malibu Oil and Gas. The issue here is twofold, Rama. One is to address the agreement for access to 9 billion barrels that could really keep all of Africa supplied for 7 years. The other issue is to put a stop to hidden company ownership and to make energy and mining companies disclose more about the payments they make to win these concessions.
Indeed. We'll have to leave it there for the time being, though. Thank you very much for your input today. That's CCTV's Miriam Bemard in London. Let's cross over to some M&A news now. Nigeria's Guarantee Trust Bank, or GT Bank as it's better known, has reached an agreement to buy 70% of Kenya's FinaBank for $100 million. That deal, however, of course, is still subjective to regulatory approvals in Nigeria and over in Kenya. Now, FinaBank has total assets worth $338 million with operations in Kenya, Rwanda and Uganda. In a statement, the Nigerian lender said it will enter East Africa through a multi-country scalable platform that will then enable it to expand its footprint right across sub-Saharan Africa. GT Bank shares have gained 13% in the year to date, and they were 1.66% higher at 26.4 naira per share following the announcement on Thursday. GT Bank at the moment is valued at about $5 billion. Time for a quick break on BizAfrica. Here's what's coming up next. It's been another ruckus week in Egypt as a new government is sworn in. We'll be looking at economic plans under the country's new team when we come back.
BizAsia. Asia means business.
Welcome back. The ouster of the former president of Egypt, Mohamed Morsi, has led to a new political roadmap, as we saw earlier in the bulletin, which has also seen the formation of an interim government and at the same time an entirely new interim president to oversee this entire transitional period. Now, the new government will be in place for anywhere between 6 to 9 months, but it has to address quite a few mounting economic challenges. With the details and a review of the challenges ahead and the potential solutions, here's CCTV's Yasser Hakim.
As cabinet members were sworn in, they knew they are taking over a country in an economic crisis. Public debt has reached an all-time high of $300 million, a constantly devaluating currency, and a widening budget deficit of 11%. Much has been made of the failure by the last government to address the economic challenges, and as such, the choice of the new economic team was vital.
It is an experienced group. Ahmed Galai is World Bank advisor, Munir Fakri and Ashraf Arabi worked successfully in previous governments, and Ziad Baha-Eddin is well respected in the business community inside and abroad. We have to remember they will only remain for a few months. It is not a permanent government.
The government is still to announce its economic reform plan and how it will deal with the controversial files left open by the Morsi cabinet.
I do not expect they will reduce subsidies on energy or impose austerity measures required by the IMF. The Gulf money and the EU assistance will make up for the IMF loan delay. But I do not expect a more positive approach to control expenditure, increase tourism, reopen closed industries and attract foreign investments.
Egypt was given a boost with the injection of $12 billion from Gulf states this week. It increased foreign reserves to a comfortable level of $20 billion and created some breathing space for the government to operate. Experts say on paper this government has the potential and proper expertise to improve the economy. But the presence of the Muslim Brotherhood in the streets and daily demonstrations will prove a major stumbling block for any economic development. This is Yasser Hakim for CCTV, Cairo.
Yasser Hakim, of course, has been covering the unfolding economic and political crisis in Egypt through its numerous phases, all the way from 2011. He joins us now live from the capital, Cairo. Yasser, let's pick up on the question that you posed in your package right there. How can any meaningful economic reform really take place if you've got daily protests running on in Cairo and elsewhere in Egypt from supporters of the Muslim Brotherhood?
Well, you just said I've been busy from 2011 working on the political and economic side, because both are together. And we've been busy because there have been demonstrations every day since 2011, and that has been the main problem for the economy. And it still is. The plans are there to develop the economy, the experts are there, but it will not happen the way the Egyptians want unless these demonstrations are contained somehow. There's a ministry in the new cabinet called the Reconciliation Ministry, and it's hoping that they will find a way to get the Muslim Brotherhood back on the political side rather than in the streets, and to have a share in the decision making on a mutual basis with the rest of the political forces in Egypt. So yes, it will take time, as long as the Muslim Brotherhood and the other Islamist forces are still in the streets, and also in Sinai, where there are a few militants having some attacks on the army there. And the government and the army are working on it right now to find a way out of this.
Let's talk about inflation. At June levels of about 9.8% or so, that's essentially a 2-year high. What's the plan for bringing that down?
The Minister of Finance, he's number 6 in 3 years only, and he said that he's planning to work on this issue in particular. He's for the liberal free market. He's a liberal guy, and he wants, besides the free market, he wants control and protection for the consumers and the prices, and also for the evaluation of the currency. So he's going to try to mix the way how to control the market, keep it free, but not give any room for corruption and power abuse by the producers and the market players in a way that would help at least the transitional period is there for 6 to 9 months to avoid any more inflation in the next few months. It's not an easy issue, but and we don't know the plans in details because it hasn't been announced yet, but at least the statements that came out are playing on that side.
Indeed. We'll have to leave it there for the time being, though. Thank you very much for that input. That's CCTV's Yasser Kim, live in the Egyptian capital of Cairo. Now, quick run through the markets for you. Bit of a mixed bag, frankly, as far as these numbers are concerned. Starting as we usually do in Nigeria, where we were earlier on with the oil bill in the debate in Parliament. It ended the day marginally in the red. The all-share index over in South Africa also in the red by a fairly substantially larger margin, 1.21 percentage point. The only green numbers on this board today coming from the Kenyans. The market there up by about 0.14 percentage points. And the Egyptian market, of course, today being a Friday, was closed. That's business for you this Friday. Let's do this again on Monday.